This show is brought to you by Buzzsprout.com, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Tale's End, the newest edition of the Random Arc Entertainment Broadcasting Network that talks about all things relating to books, comics, movies, TV shows, and video games, some relative and some not so relative, in both time and space. Make sure and stay to the very end, as we also run a Q&A month to month, answering questions submitted by you wonderful, long-time Vicious Cabaret fans, as well as any other questions that may arise from the Tale's End podcast itself, of course. I'd like to thank you all, every single one of you, for the love that has been shown for this new show. The amount of people that have reached out and provided feedback on last month's inaugural episode makes me so happy, so thank you very, very much. For those of you who want to share any of your thoughts or ask questions that could, of course, end up being featured in the Cabaret Q&A or other relevant parts of the show, all links to my social media are, of course, in the description box below. And also, a little VC-related announcement. Some people have reached out via email asking whether or not we're doing a Halloween special this year, as they really enjoyed the one that we put out last October, and the answer is a resounding yes. We are doing another one this year, and it will be followed by what will be the Season 2 finale in November. So yeah, Season 2 of Vicious Cabaret is coming to a close. It's been a hell of a ride, been to a lot of weird and wonderful and familiar places, met some new characters and expanded the universe even further. I'm proud of the work that we've done this season, and I, for one, can't wait to show you how it ends. Of course, this show will be returning in 2024. Information as to exactly when will come in due course. But all this is to say that due to the amount of work we have ahead of us to present the best Halloween special and season finale that we can, there will not be an episode of VC at the end of September. This, of course, gives us a bit more breathing space to perfect all that we need to perfect, but that, of course, does not mean that we are leaving you with nothing this month. So, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, last month we went over the elements of the Walking Dead universe, more specifically details surrounding the original TV adaptation's fall from grace and somewhat redemption in the form of the first of 3 confirmed spin-off series, that being Dead City, starring Lauren Cohan and Jeffrey Dean Morgan reprising their roles, and written and directed by Eli Journay. So if you're a Walking Dead fan and you didn't get a chance to catch that, it's up there for you. I did think about carrying on the TWD vibe this month, considering that probably at the time of recording this, the second of the 3 confirmed spin-off shows, that being Daryl Dixon with Norman Reedus, of course reprising his role, is likely to have released its first few episodes, at the very least. In fact, at the time of writing this, I happened to see a promotional picture flash up on my YouTube feed with the caption, 3 days. I'm aware that, of course, they've been posting staggered promotional photos using a countdown to build up suspense, and I totally understand that, but regardless, I just could not get that SpongeBob moment out of my head.
3 days!
Anyway, Daryl Dixon is a show we shall get to in due course when all episodes of the full season have been released. The same with the upcoming Rick and Michonne spin-off, The Ones Who Live, with Lincoln and Guerrero returning. Personally, my most anticipated show of the 3, but for September's episode, and October's, we're gonna be talking Star Wars. Namely, Ahsoka. I'm gonna be real with y'all. I thought long and hard about where to begin when it came to talking about Star Wars, and my past, present, and likely future feelings about it. But when Ahsoka came out, and I actually watched the episodes we'll be covering here, I sensed an opportunity. I sensed the rumblings of a starting point to a hopefully ongoing conversation about one of my personal favourite franchises. So, why do I think that Ahsoka is a good conversational starting point, considering the vast amount of starting points there seem to be for this franchise, in terms of timeline, age appropriation, media type, and release order? Well, I believe that the themes of Ahsoka have a lot to say about the previous themes that have carried a lot of the morality of the mainline Star Wars entries, at the very least in terms of good versus evil, Jedi versus Sith, light and dark. This show explores the ultimate flaws within both of these polarizations in a different way than Star Wars has in the past. And although it sounds corny, which is a word I don't tend to say out loud very often now I think about it, the conveyed message of how being yourself and following your heart doesn't always get you where you want to be, but where you need to be, emotionally, physically, and everything that lies between that. However, counterbalancing that, I also think that Ahsoka as a show highlights not just some of the flaws in the general morality of Star Wars, but also puts on full display some of the fundamental issues that the franchise has been facing for many years. Certain elements of stagnation and convenience and contrivance that are hard to ignore, even for a die-hard fan and consistent extended lore apologist like myself. But before we get to an episode-to-episode breakdown, I'd like to address what I like to call the critical conflict. I believe that there is a light side and a dark side to the criticisms levelled at Star Wars, and I seem to be constantly conflicted between the two. Maybe I shouldn't use such a black and white comparison to describe the Star Wars fandom. The Force and all the living things it resides within, which is all of them, is vastly more complex than just dark and light. But I'm going to make the point anyway. On the one side, you have the critical eye that commands me to shout at the TV due to certain nonsensical plot points or conveniences, bland character portrayals, lazy writing, an overabundance of CGI-fueled brain stimulation with shaky foundations supporting those sequences, which sometimes can give way to creative bankruptcy when it comes to where they, being Lucasfilm and more broadly Disney, can take the franchise as a whole, or where the studios, or indeed fans, will allow the franchise to go. Then, on the other side, you have the part nerdy, part nostalgic eye that has grown up not just watching mainline Star Wars repeatedly, but also reading it, gaming on it, both on console and in imagination, who collected the action figures, Jedi and Sith outfits and lightsabers, any starship that I could get my hands on, who even explored training with certain melee weapons just so he could look cooler swinging a lightsaber around in front of his friends and stop knocking over his grandmother's antique ornaments in her sitting room. You know, I could have just gone outside, but I wanted to know that I could have avoided the ornaments if I had to, you know. That ever-widening, geeked-out eye of nostalgia that will always be looking for supplementary lore to explain an apparent flaw in a story, who consumes material like books, comics, online fan theories, canonical or otherwise, to broaden my knowledge of the wider Star Wars universe and therefore no longer be confused or annoyed by a seeming inconsistency or certain missing information rather than just chalking it up to lazy and or bad writing or a general flaw in the overall vision. That does not mean to say that those that do chalk elements of Star Wars' story up to bad, lazy or inconsistent writing, especially when it comes to the more recent sequel trilogy releases and some of the other recent miniseries, are wrong, because often they are very much not wrong. Also, new ownership, general studio interference, and certain choices made by particular directors and producers have a large part to play. But regardless of that, not everyone is going to do what fans like me and some others would do, like take the time to, for instance, read an entire book or watch an entire series to better understand a mere cameo in a mainline entry or a strange plot or character shift between the seasons of a streaming series they just wanted to check out casually. I believe that Ahsoka is a series which definitely serves the fans more than the casual viewer, given that unless you've seen or at least know about the events of Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels particularly in this case, and other shows like The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett, you're not going to have any idea, or not going to have much of an idea, who most of these characters, particularly the titular character, even is, because she is not referred to, at least not blatantly, in the mainline Star Wars entries. You know, if you've only seen the movies, it's going to be a bit confusing. Now, maybe that wouldn't be a bad thing for the casual viewer if the way that at least some of the characters are written, directed, and presented in this new live-action adaptation possessed as much vigor and life as the animated characters and properties they are based on. But, in my opinion, both as a creator and a Star Wars fan, they often sadly do not. And let me be clear, this is not down to any of the actors themselves. Every person cast is extremely talented in their own right and have all been brilliant in other projects. And of course, are doing a wonderful job in this show. But some of what they've been given to work with, however, particularly at the beginning of the series, which thankfully gets better as it goes, leaves a bit to be desired. And we're going to get into all of that, as well as what the show does well, because there is also a lot that it succeeds and even excels at. Ahsoka is a series that has not yet finished airing. It's due to finish next month on October 3rd. Usually,
if you could call it that,
I would wait for the season to finish airing, as I did with Dead City, and I will do with most other shows going forward in the tail's end, in order to have a more full and rounded discussion about the series as a whole. However, this time around,
the second time,
shut up, we're going to split our coverage of Ahsoka into 2 separate episodes. This one covering episodes 1 to 6, and then a slightly shorter episode released early next month, most likely the day after or a couple of days after the series finale, covering the final 2 episodes of what I'm assuming at this point is just the first season, giving me, as I mentioned, a little more time throughout October to work on this year's Halloween special, which will, of course, be dropping in late October. So, with all of those 1.5 thousand-ish words of preamble in mind, let us explore Ahsoka Tano herself. And spoilers for, of course, the first 6 episodes of this new Ahsoka series, the Clone Wars series, the Rebels series, Tales of the Jedi, and yeah, pretty much all of Star Wars. I'm going to assume that those listening are either fellow fans who want to know my thoughts and don't care about spoilers or have seen it, and others who maybe know nothing about Star Wars and also don't care about spoilers. If you do care, then I guess go watch it all first. You have been warned. So yes, with all that being said, let's get into it. Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta born on planet Sheely to parents Pav T and Nak Eel around 14 years before the Clone Wars, a conflict that we see the beginning and end of in the Star Wars prequel films, and one that was brilliantly fleshed out in an animated series of the same name. Ahsoka was realized to be Force-sensitive from the age of 1 during a traditional hunt with her mother, a tradition whereby the parent takes the child out hunting in the forest to bring back food for the tribe. The mother or father would, of course, take care of the logistics, being the humane slaughtering of a local animal in order for the child to witness the importance and necessity of facing death, and death itself giving way to life. Starting them on that concept nice and early. During these events, although the lesson was learned via the example of a Kaibuck, a swift herbivore, both Ahsoka and Pav T later became cornered by a more threatening predator, a giant saber-toothed creature called a Rakshir. The Rakshir snatched Ahsoka, carrying her off into the woods and placing her on the floor of its den. The Force is known to be strong with most, if not all, animals in the Star Wars universe, and as young as the age of 1, Ahsoka connected with the Rakshir, looking deep into its glowering green eyes, likely explaining in a language she didn't yet understand that she, her mother, and the rest of her tribe were not a threat, and were likely just in the wrong place at the wrong time, depending on your point of view. The connection formed was so strong that the Rakshir carried Ahsoka back to her village, where, of course, Ahsoka's parents and the rest of the tribe were waiting, search parties having just returned and reporting no findings. And then they saw them, the Rakshir towering above most of the tribe's toughest warriors, and baby Ahsoka perched happily upon its shoulders, making her way towards them. Bowing to a safe height, the creature calmly returned the baby to her mother, to the shock of all those around. All those except the elder of the tribe, who had lived a long life, experienced enough to know that Ahsoka was indeed Jedi. You learn none of this in the new show. This is explored in other supplementary material, namely Tales of the Jedi, and I promise you we will get to why that is a large problem in due course. Anyway, Ahsoka was taken by Jedi Master Plo Koon at the age of 3, and brought to the core world of the Republic, Coruscant, where she was further raised and became Anakin Skywalker's Padawan shortly after the outbreak of the Clone Wars. She was chiefly trained by Anakin Skywalker, but also learned a great deal from Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, Plo Koon, Bail Organa, and Padme Amidala, all characters fans who have just seen the movies will be familiar with. During one of many of Ahsoka's arcs in the Clone Wars animated series, we see her, along with Obi-Wan and Anakin, enter the realm of the Mortis gods, the living embodiments of the Force. We have the daughter representing the light, the son representing the darkness, and the father representing the balance between the two. A lot happens during this arc, and I'm not going to go through it all, but what I will say is Ahsoka is killed by the son, and the daughter sacrifices her life to resurrect Ahsoka, and now lives on in the form of Ahsoka's spirit-guiding bird, called Morai, and we'll also get to that name in a little bit too, as it's taken from Greek mythology and has a lot to say and to do with the events of this new Ahsoka series. Anyway, shortly before the end of the Clone Wars, Ahsoka was framed and put on trial by the Order for a Jedi Temple bombing. Actually, let me be clear. She was framed by someone else, and then, the Order put her on trial. She wasn't framed by the Order. Thanks to the support of her master and others, she was indeed able to clear her name, but chose to leave the Jedi Order behind, having seen firsthand how flawed and turncoaty the ways of the Jedi had become. Not long after leaving the Order, she teamed up with the Mandalorian clan leader Bo-Katan to capture the Sith Lord Darth Maul and helped Bo-Katan free Mandalore from his grasp with a little help from a division of the Grand Army of the Republic co-led by Captain Rex. Surviving Order 66 by the skin of her teeth and with Rex's help, she then went into hiding, working as a farmer on a distant planet before she was forced to reveal herself as a Force user when attempting to save a co-worker. The co-worker herself was grateful and more than happy to keep Ahsoka's secret, but another villager wasn't so accepting and ended up ratting Ahsoka out to the Empire, who of course burned everything down along the way. Ahsoka was brought face to face with an Inquisitor, former Jedi turned to the dark side and ordered to hunt down their own. Ahsoka defeats this Inquisitor without a lightsaber, no less, as she left hers behind after the events of Order 66 for Darth Vader to, as it turned out, later find, taking those two red kyber crystals and turning, or to use the in-universe term, bleeding them to pure white, signifying perhaps her relatively neutral stance on the ways of the Force. She contacted one of her few remaining friends, Senator Bail Organa, who took in what was left of the villagers and brought Ahsoka in to help work against the Empire under the codename Fulcrum. She did this for around 13 years and is still using that call sign when we meet her at the beginning of this series, but she was also reunited with her fallen Jedi Master Anakin Skywalker on the Sith planet of Malachor, learning, of course, what he had become. This event occurred during the second season of Star Wars Rebels, a series set before A New Hope, going against Vader to give Jedi Master Kanan Jarrus and apprentice Ezra Bridger of Rebel Cell Phoenix Squadron a chance to escape. Ahsoka held her own, but at the time it seemed to be a losing battle against Vader in the end. However, as we see later in Star Wars Rebels Season 4, Ahsoka is pulled away from Vader's killing blow on Malachor and through a portal into what is known as the World Between Worlds, a cosmic realm existing outside time and space by a future or 2 years older version of Ezra himself. Ezra found his way into the World Between Worlds 2 years after the events of the battle on Malachor and near the end of Star Wars Rebels' fourth and final season, ripping Ahsoka out of her own time to safety, and they both then returned to their relative present days, Ezra returning to Lothal and Ahsoka returning to Malachor. However, it's not yet clear, or we don't yet know, whether Ahsoka's return to the Sith planet after meeting Ezra in the World Between Worlds was years in the future or still 2 years before when she was there originally, with Vader having possibly just later departed, because when she gets back there, it's just, it's empty and deserted. We'll also get back to the World Between Worlds thing when we arrive at our exploration of Episode 5, so stay tuned for that. But regardless, by the time we see Ahsoka again, it's in the Mandalorian series, where we see her hunting and capturing Morgan Elsbeth, a character who we didn't yet know, at least not at the time of the Mandalorian series release, would be one of the main antagonists of this new Ahsoka series. When we meet Morgan Elsbeth in The Mandalorian, she's a Beskar, the adamantium of the Star Wars universe, if you like, that can block lightsabers. A Beskar spear-toting militaristic type who is a loyalist of Grand Admiral Thrawn, one of the other main antagonists of this new Ahsoka series. of the Rebels series, and in my opinion, one of the best villains in Star Wars history, but we'll get to him in a bit too. After beating Morgan Elsbeth and handing off her Beskar spear to the Mandalorian series protagonist Din Djarin, we then see her have a chat with the adorable Grogu, of course, and finally have some screen time with Luke Skywalker in the Book of Boba Fett later on as well. So you see how many series and other supplementary material consumptions are necessary for understanding Ahsoka Tano as a character in a more rounded way. My overall point of all of this is we're 6 episodes in, people. 6 episodes in, and none, and I mean none, of what I have just explained is really ever mentioned or referred to. Now, you could argue that it doesn't have to be. We don't need flashbacks and origins for everything shoved in our faces right up top, especially if you're a fan and you've already seen all of the stuff that explains what I've just explained. But do I also think that it would have helped this new series to give us a few reimagined reminders, or perhaps some live-action recontextualizations, if that's a word, of Ahsoka's history? Given that the wonderfully talented Rosario Dawson, who plays Ahsoka, along with some other actors in this show, seem to be being directed not to emote that much, I would say yes. Some live-action context for the events transpiring in the series, especially in the first 2 episodes, that are unfortunately clogged up with some unneeded clunky storytelling, which we'll get to in a minute. But dear Heavenly Lightning Lord, I swear if I had not been a Star Wars fan most of my life and had the time to take in these various series at a pace that my brain could actually process and remember half this stuff, then I would have no idea what the hell is going on. But I have seen all of Star Wars and read a great deal of it in comics and novel form, so I do know. But that did not stop my frustration. And yes, people who have seen this show, I know that there is a flashback sequence with a younger Ahsoka in episode 5, played wonderfully by Ariana Greenblatt, and it focuses on how Ahsoka felt during that time in the Clone Wars. But that relatively carries slightly less weight, in my opinion, than what they could have been showing us. But anyway, we've arrived at episode 1, so without further ado, let the breakdown begin. Now, I'm not going to do what I did last time and go through the series twice with first scripted and then unscripted thoughts, because there's so much to cover. We're just going to do it all at once, and I'll jump in and out of tangents as necessary, hopefully keeping it all on track as we go. One thing I have to say right off the bat is that the composer Kevin Kiner is killing it on this show. The music that I of course cannot play for copyright reasons is popping off here. Kiner composed the music for Clone Wars and Rebels, mostly taking cues from John Williams' original score, who wouldn't? But in later years of Clone Wars and a large amount of Rebels, Kiner got the opportunity to branch out and experiment a bit more, especially for never-before-seen characters. We get a non-slanted opening crawl, in red this time.
The evil galactic empire has fallen, and the new republic has taken its place.
Thank you. So we get an idea of where the series sits in the timeline. For those who skipped my rundown on the Ahsoka section, after the events of Return of the Jedi. We get a brief explanation about who Morgan Elsbeth is and who Grand Admiral Thrawn is. For those who don't know, Grand Admiral Thrawn is a blue-skinned, red-eyed Chiss from the unknown regions of the prime Star Wars galaxy, a place known as the Chiss Ascendancy. He's a tactical genius who learns everything there is to know about his enemy, including their artistic histories, a huge asset to the Empire and main antagonist of the Star Wars Rebels series. We last saw him covered in a bunch of hyperspace star whale or Purgle tentacles, before, thanks to Ezra Bridger, he was blasted off into what we learn is another galaxy along with Ezra himself. Another galaxy only accessible by either these hyperspace whales, creatures explored quite a bit in the Rebel series, or by a mixture of current technology and ancient magic. Magic even more ancient than the Sith and the Jedi. That of the Night Sisters of Dathomir, mostly expanded upon in the Clone Wars, Rebels, and this very series we are discussing. The opening crawl tells us that one of Thrawn's allies, Morgan Elsbeth, who we've mentioned and who was previously captured by Ahsoka Tano in The Mandalorian Season 2, has learned of a secret map that is vital to the enemy's plan, i.e. Thrawn's return. We then shift to a New Republic cruiser being intercepted by two people claiming to be Jedi, or at least are using an old Jedi frequency. These two people, however, are revealed to not exactly be Jedi, but not exactly be Sith either. Two, perhaps, dark Jedi or light Sith, Master Baylan Skoll and apprentice Shin Hati. We'll get to the significance of their particular surnames in a bit, but those familiar with Norse mythology will know what I'm getting at. They wield lightsabers that are dark orange in colour, one that hasn't really been seen before in any live-action canon story, in terms of Disney's takeover. We see Baylan and Shin take out the rather incompetent New Republic guards on the ship and break Morgan Elsbeth out of prison. Side note, Baylan uses the Force to unlock the scomp link on the cell, something only previously possible with specific keys or the help of a droid, like an astromech like R2, indicating that this guy has very intricate knowledge of the Force and is not just some mercenary, so we know that right off the bat. Having watched up to episode 6, I can confirm that Baylan Skoll, played wonderfully by the late and great Ray Stevenson, is the most interesting character on this show so far, and we'll get into why as it comes up. After the prison break, we move over to a ruined temple on a planet we will later learn is called Arcana, an ancient stronghold of Morgan Elsbeth's ancestors, the Night Sisters of Dathomir, or the Dathomiri. Now, for those who have seen the Mandalorian series and therefore have seen Ahsoka's technical live-action debut and also the introduction of Morgan Elsbeth, I'm just going to let the whole Morgan Elsbeth Dathomiri thing hang there for a minute. Let that set in. Morgan Elsbeth is a Night Sister all of a sudden. And no, this does not explain why she was able to go toe-to-toe with Ahsoka when they first met in the second season of The Mandalorian. You don't need magic to go up against a Jedi or a former Jedi if you're a skilled fighter and you've got something that can block or go against a lightsaber. You can go against a Jedi. There was no hint or clue whatsoever that she was a Night Sister, and yes, you could say that she was hiding it or whatever, but I found it very jarring.
You could say you found it very jarring.
And she just suddenly felt to me like a different character, possibly intentionally, to be fair. Maybe that's how I was supposed to feel, but it wasn't a nice jarring feeling. It was a this doesn't make sense jarring feeling. And this is also coming from someone that watched The Mandalorian Season 2 after the double episode premiere of Ahsoka. So I didn't even know that Morgan Elsbeth was a previously introduced character until I watched The Mandalorian and was like, oh, she's in this. Why isn't she using her magic? Did they just randomly make her a Night Sister, or is there a better reason for this? Regardless, Night Sisters refer to a group of female Dathomirians/Dathomiri, which did in fact include Mother Talzin, Darth Maul's mother, a leader of a kind of witches' coven that uses their green misted magic to perform incredible feats, including reanimating Maul's legs and mixing that with a bit of Star Warsian robotics technology in order for Maul to regain his full potential after Obi-Wan cut him in half in The Phantom Menace. They are mostly explored in canon during the events of the Clone Wars, and to a lesser but still quite important extent in Rebels later on. For those who don't know, Dave Filoni, the creative vision behind a lot of the new live-action shows like The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett, and animated shows like The Clone Wars and Rebels in the past, and of course Ahsoka that we're talking about now, based the Night Sisters of Dathomir on the Witches of Dathomir from Dave Wolverton's 1994 Extended Universe Legends novel, The Courtship of Princess Leia. And a Witch of Dathomir also appeared earlier in 1985 in the Ewok movie, The Battle of Endor. So they've kind of been with us since the Return of the Jedi era of Star Wars in terms of initial appearance and release. And this new Ahsoka show is set around that point in the timeline. So, one, they haven't just come out of nowhere. They've been with us for quite a long time, since the original Star Wars era, and two, have been well fleshed out in other media. But to the casual viewer of this new Ahsoka series, For example, a lot of people are saying things like, there's witchcraft in Star Wars now, like visible, green, foggy magic above and beyond or alongside the abilities of Force users. Yes. Yeah, and there has been for quite some time. That I find less jarring than Morgan Elspeth's sudden reveal as a Night Sister. But anyway, moving on. It's a character reframe. Sure, it's just one I'm not sure I buy. We see Rosario Dawson looking awesome as ever, wandering through this Night Sister temple of Arcana, cutting through the floor and exploring the ruins beneath. After a couple of Tomb Raider-style puzzles, Ahsoka manages to reveal the star map sphere, the one that leads not just to Thrawn, but to Ezra Bridger as well. And I'm sorry to say this, all the Assassin's Creed fans out there will know what I'm talking about, but the star map just looks like an apple of Eden. I'm sorry, but it just does. Watch it again and you'll know what I mean. Anyway, Ahsoka is attacked by a bunch of TK droids, all wielding Inquisitor sabers, if my memory serves me correctly, and these droids are possibly powered by Night Sister magic, or at least one of them is, but we'll get to that in a bit. A cool fight then occurs, but precedes one of the stupidest things in the entire show in terms of antagonist plan, logistics, and stuff like that. So, okay, sure, the droids know Ahsoka has the map, but the fact that these droids were sent to recover this special important map, of which there is only one, right, there's only one of these maps, and decide it's a good idea to self-destruct, to level the entire temple, and hopefully, in their minds, Ahsoka herself, but also, therefore, the star map. Now sure, Ahsoka jumped onto her ship at the last second, but the droids that have just disintegrated themselves and this entire localized planet surface don't know that for sure. If they had succeeded in atomizing Ahsoka, how the hell were they gonna be able to use the map to do anything if it was destroyed along with her? It would have ruined the antagonist's entire plan right off the bat, and it makes no sense, and it makes less sense as the show goes on, and to me, is made of stupid, and probably only exists so that we can have a cool explosion for the protagonist to sprint away from, and a little saved by the ship moment, or saved by the droid moment, which I hate that I loved. But anyway, we're reintroduced to Jedi training droid Hu Yang, voiced by David Tennant, who seems to emote more with just his voice than a lot of these characters in this show seem to do with their entire faces. But anyway, Ahsoka and Hu Yang are contacted by the Mon Calamari ship Home One and learn of Morgan Elspeth's outbreak, and so they head to the New Republic ship, and that's where we get to meet the live-action General Hera Syndulla for the very first time. Of course, one of the main characters from Star Wars Rebels, pilot and leader of Phoenix Squadron, the mother of Jacen Syndulla, whose father was the late Kanan Jarrus, Ezra Bridger's Jedi Master. Hera, played by the wonderful Mary Elizabeth Winstead, suggests that Ahsoka take the map to Sabine Wren on Lothal, Ahsoka's former Padawan, sister figure to Ezra, and the tech genius and Mandalorian warrior of Rebels' Phoenix Squadron, and the best chance that Ahsoka has at unlocking that map. Also, she's technically the descendant of one of the few Mandalorians who ever became a Jedi, as there were historically very few. His name was Tar Vizsla. Sabine Wren is a descendant of Clan and House Vizsla. Before we get to Sabine, I'd like to say that it was really, really cool to see certain callbacks to the original trilogy during Ahsoka and Hera's first scene together. They meet in one of the Mon Calamari council rooms, similar to the room Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar gave the briefing in Return of the Jedi. Also, as they fly into Home One, there's a nice shot that mirrors Han Solo's flight path past Home One, also in Return of the Jedi. We all know I love mirrored storytelling. I just wish they could have used it a little more creatively, as they had in other recent Star Wars series, but we'll get to that when it becomes more glaringly obvious to address it. We meet Sabine in the process of avoiding the Rebel Alliance Remembrance Ceremony on Lothal, and side note, it's great to see Clancy Brown playing Ryder Azadi in live action, giving a speech at the ceremony Sabine is supposed to be attending. I grew up watching Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor in the Bruce Timm Superman and Justice League cartoons, and he voiced Ryder in Rebels, so having him come back for this is just awesome to see. What was also awesome to see, side note, was the painted mural from Rebels, which Ryder Azadi was giving the speech in front of. This is relevant as it was painted by Sabine, who is a very gifted artist and often decorated her own Beskar armor, giving it unique flares as the Rebel series carried forward. But the mural, which depicts all of the beloved Phoenix Squadron, so Kanan, Ezra, Hera, Sabine, Zeb, Chopper, some beautiful Loth cats, and 2 giant Loth wolves, also incredibly significant to the Rebel series as a whole.
Can you tell the Rebel series is his favorite?
Shut up! And incredibly important to Kanan's story. Specifically, the wolves in the mural tower in size over the members of Phoenix Squadron as they did in their original depictions. However, what I believe is important about the way these 2 Loth wolves are depicted in the mural is that the wolf on the left-hand side is light and the wolf on the right-hand side is dark. As a shot relevant to the story of this show, I believe that it's incredibly important foreshadowing for Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati's character journeys. Their surnames, if you don't already know, refer to the 2 wolves in Norse mythology who chase the sun and moon. And having watched up to episode 6, I still think that this is where they're going with this, but it's not yet been confirmed outright in the show so far. Anyway, we meet Sabine, played by the wonderful Natasha Leia Bardizzo, speeding down a Lothal highway listening to a pretty catchy rock song, which is unusual for Star Wars, and I like it, being chased by 2 A-Wing pilots who have been ordered to track down Sabine because she should actually be giving a speech at that current moment. The pilot chatting away to Sabine as she rides has a call sign Spectre 2-1. This refers to how the members of Phoenix Squadron, or the crew of Hera's awesome ship, the Ghost, numbered themselves. So Kanan was Spectre 1, Hera Spectre 2, Chopper Spectre 3, Zeb Spectre 4, Sabine Spectre 5, Ezra Spectre 6, and Jason, Kanan and Hera's son, is given the call sign Spectre 7 at the end of the series run, and that presumably carries forward into this new series. Sabine outruns or outcrazies the pursuing pilots who, out of respect for her rather daring maneuver, let her go. We see that Sabine is living in the old Lothal Communications Tower, previous home to Ezra Bridger. Seeing all of this come to life in live action is really awesome, and it's difficult for me to ignore that fact. Seeing a lot of things in the background like drawings of Loth wolves, Loth cat, seeing a live action Loth cat, Sabine's pet, which is a mixture of puppetry and CGI, kind of the same technique that they used for Grogu in The Mandalorian. It's super cute, but for some reason, on initial viewing, I just wasn't 100% sold on the live action design. I had a note on my initial viewing that I wrote down going, the cat looks a little malnourished somehow. Anyway, we see that Sabine has a holo recording of Ezra Bridger played in this series by Iman Isfandi, who I believe was cast perfectly for this live-action reimagining, even though we don't actually see him in the flesh until episode 5, which I think does the show a disservice, but we'll get to that soon. Ezra, it turns out, left a message for Sabine, a personal one, before going face-to-face with Thrawn in the Rebels finale. We see in the finale itself that Ezra made a recording for the whole crew, but now we learn that he also made a more personal one, as I said, for Sabine. It's possible he did a personal message to all of the crew individually, but I doubt he would have had time for that given the circumstances of the finale. Anyway, we see that the bond Ezra and Sabine shared has not faded in the slightest, and this is conveyed through Natasha's performance, in my opinion. She certainly gets to emote more in this show than Ahsoka does, but is still holding back, or more likely is being directed to do so, which I think is an issue. But this scene, her performance mixed with the music, really sells how much she misses her brother figure. It's apparent also that Sabine has grown out her hair, which tells us how long it's been since she last wore her Mando armor, along with the shot of her helmet under her desk gathering dust. It's explained in Rebels that she always keeps her hair short because otherwise her helmet gets too hot, and it's also just not practical, so she's been off the battlefield for quite some time. This makes her encounter with the HK droids at the end of that episode slightly more believable, but no less annoying, speaking as someone who spent 4 years watching Sabine kick ass constantly, so inconsistency or conveyance of rustiness. You decide, listeners. You decide. I'm getting ahead of myself. It cuts from Sabine viewing Ezra's message back to the planet Arcana, where we see Morgan reveal more about her history to Baylan and Shin. Morgan defines herself as a survivor, someone who has had to hold close to her ways in order to survive over the generations, in a way that the Jedi and the Sith have not. Possibly makes the reveal less jarring. Possibly. We see apprentice Shin Hati, played by the way by the wonderful Ivana Sakno, being generally mistrustful of Morgan, and Baylan beginning to see that the whole Night Sisters of Dathomir thing is more than just superstitious hearsay. Cuts back to Sabine dreaming about Ezra, followed by a shot of Sabine looking out of the comms tower at Ahsoka's T6 Jedi ship being escorted by 2 X-Wings. This shot mirrors the opening shot of Star Wars Rebels, where we see Ezra looking out of the comms tower and seeing a Star Destroyer looming above his head, heading towards his hometown. This, of course, followed by the first live-action reunion of Ahsoka and Sabine, estranged master and apprentice. Ahsoka agreed to train Sabine after Ezra's disappearance, but it seems things didn't work out. Now, this is something I would have liked to have seen evidence of, other than their collective initial grumpiness towards each other. It would have been nice to see them getting along previously in little flashbacks, maybe flashbacks that lack dialogue, just something to show us what they both actually left behind, as opposed to them just having awkward passive-aggressive reunion chats, because neither of them really get to emote as much as their animated characters, and that's not just because it's a live-action adaptation. It's a strange choice that I believe has been made by the director, and an incorrect one, because these characters do have established distinct personalities, which these actors are fully capable of displaying, and barely any of that comes through in this series, which upsets me. Using things like brief flashbacks or dream sequences even to show the positive side of their relationship would have really helped the lack of pizzazz that comes across in some of the dialogue delivery. Now, maybe there was nothing positive about their master and apprentice relationship, and that's the reason why it's so awkward, but I highly doubt that. And it's not awkwardness that fades, and it's not the kind of awkwardness that's natural after an estranged meeting. It just feels lacking somehow. The reunion is followed by one of the most annoying plot conveniences and contrivances of the entire series as well. Ahsoka, of course, shows Sabine the map, and after some passive-aggressive exchanges between the two, Sabine asks if she can go and work on it somewhere where she can think more clearly. A reasonable request that is then also reasonably denied by Ahsoka, given that they're likely being hunted. But, of course, Sabine being Sabine, the stubborn Mandalorian that she is, takes the map anyway and heads to the comms tower. Now, all that is technically fine, but it's also made of stupid, because as soon as I saw Sabine riding back to the comms tower, I went, oh, and Shin's gonna be hanging out on the highway? Yup. There she is. Of course Shin is here. Of course Ahsoka and Sabine are separated. Of course Sabine is gonna face Shin and it's gonna go horribly wrong and she's gonna have to learn a lesson. Jesus. Now, I'm fine with character actions depicting personality. I'm fine with Sabine asking to take the map. She wouldn't be able to concentrate currently in Ahsoka's presence. She feels awkward, etc. I get Ahsoka playing it safe and saying no, but the fact that I could predict Sabine being tracked by Shin a good 5 minutes before it happened on my initial viewing of episode 1, it just really annoyed me. And I know that there are many stories in which predictability is not a bad thing, but in this case it was. It didn't make me go, oh yeah, I was right, Shin's gonna be there. It made me go, oh, Shin's there. Well, this is gonna go horribly wrong. And it didn't make me go, ooh, it made me go, oh, for feck's sake. And I get it, themes, development, lessons, humility, but there were ways around this, and they could have changed a couple of things that would make me shout at Sabine and Ahsoka a bit less. I shouldn't be shouting at Sabine Wren for doing something this predictable and stupid, and I also shouldn't be shouting at Ahsoka for being so negligent and slow on the uptake, but I am, because the story needs to happen and it's stupid. And I am more annoyed with that than I'm annoyed with Sabine getting shivved by a lightsaber at the end of the episode and surviving. It's these plot contrivances that are the problem for me. And sure, Sabine unlocks the map, moves the plot forward, whatever, but either have Ahsoka track Sabine earlier and approach her sooner, fight alongside her for a bit, get pinned down by the HKs, and then Sabine gets stabbed anyway, so both Ahsoka and Sabine learn a lesson, or have Ahsoka fly faster from the main city to the comms tower, because I'm sorry, but she could have gone full sublight thrusters from her landing pad to the comms tower and done a really cool Obi-Wan style Revenge of the Sith jump out of the T6 and slam down on the droids or Shin. Then they fight together. Sabine still gets stabbed, lesson still learned. Your master won't always be there to protect you, won't always be there in time, and you need to shape up on your saber skills, Sabine. All of that still there while showing Ahsoka being as competent as I believe her character still deserves, even at the beginning of this specific character arc, instead of cruising slowly and looking mildly perturbed. I also don't care that Sabine gets stabbed and survives for the lore reason that she's a Mandalorian, born on Mandalore, they're tough. It was only in the side, and I'm sure Qui-Gon Jinn would be pissed at this, but Maul did slash to the right, post-stabbing, and basically cut his heart in two, as opposed to Shin stabbing Sabine, and Shin seems to miss all of the important stuff, which is also immediately cauterized. Like, if you're going to be stabbed in the side by anything, a lightsaber, I suppose, is better than a blaster any day, but I also don't care because of the thumbnail of the following episode, which shows Sabine alive and well and smiling, kind of, with short hair, standing on the T6 next to Ahsoka. So other than Sabine needing to learn a contrived lesson and making Ahsoka and Hu Yang seem annoyingly incompetent, all of that seemed pretty pointless. Before I even clicked play, I knew the plot point was resolved. Not great marketing and not a great choice for the story, or maybe it's obvious that she would be fine, so what's the point of the cliffhanger? And also, what's the point in the double bill episode drop at the beginning if you're going to have a cliffhanger at the start of a series that you're going to immediately resolve in the next few seconds? It kind of annoys me. You know it's resolved, and you know that she's probably going to be back under Ahsoka's wing again and ready for battle because of her costume, stance, expression, and hair. So I guess for episode 2, I'll just talk about the other elements that are explored. So what do I think we need to cover for episode 2? Sabine informs Ahsoka that she not only lost the map and got herself shivved by Shin, but she also unlocked the map and is unable to remember or perhaps did not see the name of the planet that is the starting point of a pathway to another galaxy. The same galaxy, of course, where Ezra and Thrawn are stranded. We transition over to this very starting point, the planet Cetos, in the Denab system, where we find Baylan and Shin touching down beside even more ancient-looking ruins constructed by persons as yet unknown. The design of this place rather reminiscent of Stonehenge. Baylan calls it the Reflex Point. Some people are calling it the Waypoint Henge. We'll just stick with Reflex Point. This place is revealed to be intrinsically connected to the star map and is activated by the sphere itself. Now, some people have asked how Morgan knew where the sphere was located on Arcana, but didn't know where the Reflex Point was. And I would add to that and say, why did they need Sabine to unlock the map in the first place, other than for her herself to find out about the path to another galaxy? Also considering that when Morgan arrives on Cetos later in the episode and activates the Reflex Point with her Green Knight sister magic, I would also ask, if you could activate the Reflex Point with your magic, why did it matter if Sabine unlocked it or not? Because Morgan didn't know where the starting point planet was? Couldn't Morgan have just unlocked it anyway and then found it out regardless? I don't mind Morgan being privy to information that other characters are not, given that the nature of how she knows things is yet to be fully explored. But it's difficult to have a character that is presented as having most of the answers, considering she was competent enough to have Baylan and Shin's droids blow up the entire temple on Arcana in the last episode, and have her not know where the starting planet is, which makes the bombing of the temple on Arcana even more nonsensical, and having the ability to just jailbreak open the sphere means that Sabine having opened it doesn't actually give their enemies any advantage. The show just makes us, and I guess Sabine, think it does for a few minutes. For us, not for her though, but whatever. The only reason that those two contradictions exist, or coexist, is so our main characters have a vague idea of where to go in the beginning of the next episode. Maybe none of this matters, but it annoyed me, so I'm going to mention it. Anyway, Ahsoka uses a force ability known as psychometry to sense the events of the battle the night before. It's a method by which holding an object or meditating in a place can give you impressions and echoes of events that occurred with that object or in that place. Ahsoka makes her way up to the comms tower where we see Sabine's Loth cat hanging outside the front door, not curled up inside. There is a nice silent exchange between the cat and Ahsoka. Ahsoka herself looks around, and then hearing a warning hissed from the cat outside the door, it's revealed that one of the HK droids from the battle the previous night is still chilling on Sabine's ceiling. Side note, the cat was also responsible for warning Sabine about the attack from Shin and her droids the night before, and I thought that was cute. I feel bad now for calling the cat malnourished. Sabine would beat my ass. Anyway, Ahsoka makes short work of the droid and brings its head to Sabine, who deduces, by nearly blowing up the droid's head in the center of a hospital, that the droid came from the planet Corellia, the place where Han Solo began. Though they don't say that was just what I thought. After a couple of hologram Hera-led pep talks in the hospital, Hera agrees to join Ahsoka on Corellia while Sabine heals up in Hu Yang's ego-destroying company. He mentions how, in terms of aptitude for the Force, Sabine sucks. Before we get to Corellia, I do briefly want to mention the fact that this reflex point is not said to be of Night Sister origin. Morgan doesn't directly claim it to be built by the Night Sisters of Dathomir, but instead says an ancient people from a distant galaxy. And the temple, though, seems to be controllable through Night Sister magic as well. This ancient people that Morgan is referring to could be the Rakatans, an ancient amphibious humanoid species, also known as the Builders, that were said to have invented hyperspace technology in the Star Wars universe. They were a Force-sensitive race that were corrupted by the dark side, creating the first ever so-called infinite empire and enslaving and laying waste to every other species or society they came across. That empire could be currently significant also. The map that is revealed at the reflex point that points to this distant galaxy, this so-called pathway to Peridia, is a pathway encircled on the map by star whale or Purgle symbols, not just indicating that the Purgle migrant path is the so-called intergalactic pathway to Peridia that all must follow to get there, but also that if the theory about the Rakatans building the reflex point is correct, it would mean that the Rakata likely somehow found a way of harnessing the Purgle's natural hyperspace ability in order to create the hyperspace technology that we see everywhere in Star Wars. I think this addition is wonderful, and though I understand why some people think it's stupid, I completely disagree, and you're allowed to hate it if you hate it. I just don't. The Purgle are awesome and adorable. Oh, and they're chilling in the sky on Cetos, which I guess makes sense. We'll talk more about the Rakatans in the next episode when I speak more about a comparison I'd like to make between this Ahsoka series and the recent, far more self-contained Andor series. But for now, all I'll say is, though the Rakata were thought to exist within the Legends lore and forgotten video game canon of Star Wars, the fact that it was mentioned in a Star Wars series as obscure and brilliant as Andor was, it brings the Rakatans in to the Disney Star Wars canon, and so applies to Ahsoka and everything else that Filoni, who is a fan of these extended Legends characters, has been heavily involved with, meaning that the Night Sisters as an organization or a way of life could have existed back around the time when the Rakatans were knocking around, since she is able to manipulate the reflex point with her magic. I think that the idea of Night Sisters existing back before Jedi and Sith is a super cool idea, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it. They're also playing with elements of time travel in this show, but we'll get to that at some point soon. Moving on to Corellia, we meet Chopper for the first time in live action, voiced of course by Dave Filoni, and being his usual sassy and insane droidy self. We also meet Chris Taub from House MD. I mean, Regional Supervisor Min Weaver, played by the wonderful Peter Jacobson. I grew up watching House MD, and Taub was one of my favourite supporting characters, so seeing him here playing a slightly shiftier version of that was really cool for me. It was also fun to see the Phantom, the drop ship that attaches to the Ghost in the Rebels series, come to life. It was also fun to see Peter Jacobson's character get totally ratted out by an honest protocol droid who helps Ahsoka and Hera ultimately determine that everyone working in this Corellian shipyard is still loyal to the Empire. This is also confirmed by everyone in the control room pulling out blasters on Ahsoka and Hera and shouting, "For the Empire!" That'll also kind of give it away. Rather conveniently, Ahsoka and Hera arrive on Corellia just in time to see a cargo ship escaping carrying an illegally repurposed hyperdrive core, at the exact time that the fanatics in the control room decide to pull out their blasters. But I won't go on about it because I got to see Ahsoka have a pretty cool fight with Marok, the most Inquisitor-like of Shin's backup battalion. He even possesses an Inquisitor lightsaber more similar to the ones that were used in Rebels, not to mention he's actually named instead of given a droid-like designation, but we do know he's not actually human despite his humanoid appearance, like body-wise. We might get to what he is later, possibly in the next episode. What he's not is Ezra Bloody Bridger or Starkiller, Vader's sadly no longer canon force-wielding wrecking ball of an apprentice voiced by the wonderful Sam Witwer, who is credited with additional voices in this show, but mostly is known for also giving a voice personality and a hell of an amount of menacing and manipulative gravitas to Darth Maul in Clone Wars and Rebels. Anyway, some people thought that he may have been returning as a hidden Starkiller in the form of Marok at the time of this episode's airing, but that turned out not to be true. Anyway, Marok fights Ahsoka, and if you want a Starkiller callback, you could say that Ahsoka's move of force pushing while gripping a lightsaber, kind of doing a upturned Spider-Man gesture with her hands, pointer and pinky outstretched, while the middle two grip the saber itself, or, the devil's fingers, is reminiscent of the way that Starkiller used the Force in those unfortunately now non-canon games. Anyway, Marok and Ahsoka fight while Chopper and Hera chase the cargo ship and put a tracker on its hull in one of Chopper's many glorious moments in this series. I love Chopper, the sassiest droid in Star Wars history, who unfortunately may also be a bit of a mass murderer. But anyway, moving on. The tracker leads them to planet Cetos, of course, and on the way, Ahsoka picks up a healed, newly trimmed, and armoured Sabine, and there's a nice sequence that sort of mirrors a sequence in Season 4 of Rebels when Kanan cuts his hair on the day of his death, and although it's nice, it carries less weight than what it's attempting to reference, and many would say that that's a problem that affects a lot of new Star Wars, but for now, the Episode 2 thumbnail has been established, and now Ahsoka, Sabine, and Huyang, along with Hera, hopefully later bringing official New Republic backup, are off to planet Cetos. Before the episode draws to a close, the Eye of Sion is revealed in orbit above planet Cetos. We see that it's constructed from a kind of golden ore, perhaps ore that has properties manipulable by Night Sister magic. The Eye of Sion is a hyperspace ring, one that requires, it's either 7 or 9 hyperdrives in order to function on an intergalactic traveling level. On the bridge, we see a conversation between Morgan Elspeth and Shin and Balin. Rather than the classic flickering holograms, the blue flickering holograms communications that we usually see in Star Wars, this comm is of higher resolution than usual and seemingly also colored green, like the technology is linked intrinsically with the Night Sister magic, being able to achieve incredible feats like intergalactic travel, but also smaller, simpler things like higher resolution Zoom meetings. Pretty interesting.
Nothing can prevent our journey.
To kill her would be a shame. There are so few Jedi left.
Sentimental.
Truth.
Good dialogue. The next episode opens with the T6 in hyperspace and Sabine training with Huyang using hologram targeting technology that calculates the accuracy and vector of Sabine's strikes. Huyang's assessment is as follows.
Not bad, but not good.
Following this, Sabine partakes in some samurai-inspired training that involves wearing a blindfolded mask, not dissimilar to the helmets that the younglings wore in the prequels, but in terms of technique, but also very similar to Luke's blast shield visor that he wears in A New Hope on Obi-Wan's instruction. I like this sequence, but I believe that they could have found a more creative way of referencing the dialogue of the original scene instead of Sabine just basically saying exactly what Luke said. I know that it's allowed to be because it's Star Wars, but it felt that that specific dialogue callback was just a little too on the nose. I do, however, enjoy the sequence itself, and we do see Sabine begin to gain a little more spatial awareness without the use of her eyes, although Huyang still isn't pleased. The Jedi Order would not have accepted her. She is not an acceptable candidate. Love the droid's honesty, but I do believe that Ahsoka has a point when she counters that despite the Jedi's proven standards over millennia, their ways ultimately failed. They failed her specifically, and so their standards might not be the best to judge Sabine against in this case, especially since, as Hu Yang himself points out, very few Mandalorians ever became Jedi due to the history between Force users and the soldiers of Mandalore that goes back far further than the events of the mainline entries of Star Wars.
Anger and frustration are quick to give power, but they also unbalance you.
This line echoing something Kanan said in the Rebels series when teaching Sabine the basics of lightsaber combat with the Darksaber, something we'll get into in terms of the Darksaber, another time, because that would need an episode in itself. Maybe we'll cover it in early October. Maybe. Anyway, Kanan mentioned that although Sabine is incredibly open and expressive, she is also very tightly wound, which Hera then points out is very, very Mandalorian. Although Sabine being a descendant of a Mandalorian Jedi, as previously mentioned, may be significant in this show going forward. Shifting over to Home 1, orbiting what is either Coruscant or possibly Chandrila, the newly established capital of the New Republic and also now Chancellor Mon Mothma's home world. The capital of the New Republic works on a kind of rotational basis, if you like, and the next one, it turns out, will be Hasnian Prime, which is destroyed by Starkiller Base in The Force Awakens. And no, I'm not sure if either J.J. Abrams or Snoke, the character, named it that because it has to drain suns to work, or because of the now non-canon Secret Apprentice I mentioned earlier, but who cares? Moving on. We see Hera give some New Republic senators a piece of her mind as they refuse to believe any of the evidence of Thrawn's return or future return, or refuse to do anything about it, refusing to provide any official backup for General Syndulla. She lets a particular pillar of the opposition have it when she says,
Were you ever in the war, Senator?
No.
Just sat back and waited to see who came out on top?
ouch, love it. Receiving no help from a particularly useless Mon Mothma, played again by the brilliant Genevieve O'Reilly, a character who was integral, like really important and integral, by the way, to the success of the rebellion. You only have to watch certain episodes of Rebels or any of Andor to understand this. And there's a couple of books that expand on it as well. Anyway, Hera decides to go to Cetos regardless, bringing a squadron of X-Wings and her droid and her 10-year-old son, Jason, who we also find out has Chopper, the insane droid, as a regular babysitter. So I'm calling it Baby Sith Lord in the making. There's a cute moment when we switch back over to Sabine that involves her trying to use the Force to get a cup to come to her hand. And some have pointed out that her opening one eye after seeing that it's not working out is to depict her comfort with sharpshooting weapons, and also to delineate the fact that she's thinking in the wrong vein about the Force, which she then attempts to rectify by centering herself and opening her eyes to focus properly. I like this, and I agree with it. Unfortunately, however, she is interrupted by bad news from Hera about Republic reinforcements, or the lack thereof, and that message itself is also cut short for their arrival at Cetos. They drop out of hyperspace, far out of scanner range, Hu Yang doing his thing and following standard Jedi protocol, and in a shot that you can't help but see as mirrored with A New Hope, they discover that there's a giant object, of course, orbiting the planet. They are pursued by Shin, Marek, and a couple of droids in fighters reminiscent of World War II fighter planes, which is really cool, and there's a nice space battle sequence that attempts to show Ahsoka and Sabine's relationship in a positive light, learning to trust each other, give each other second chances rather than criticize, especially on Ahsoka's part. We get a nonsensical but fun sequence where Ahsoka goes out on the wing of the T-6 in a spacesuit to use her lightsaber to deflect and fight against the enemy ships. And you could say, well, why don't they just blow up the ship instead of firing directly at the only thing that could cause the fighters any trouble? And how Ahsoka was able to turn that awesome looking jump into an arc instead of flying off into space or being immediately caught in Cetos' gravitational pull. I could get hung up on these things, but when Newton's law doesn't apply in the Star Wars universe, and neither does sound being projected in space, seem to be a thing that anyone who loves or hates Star Wars actually has a problem with, I guess I should just move on. They get the ship back online and make their way to the planet where they encounter a pod of Purrgil. This is a good moment for Sabine and Ahsoka, a good emoting moment, as the last time Sabine saw these creatures was the last time she, of course, saw Ezra. The Purrgil even, I believe, help Ahsoka and Sabine who is piloting at this point to escape their enemy pursuers by confusing Shin and Marek's flight paths. And therefore Sabine and Ahsoka are able to hide the T6 in some very conveniently coloured trees, the red forests of Cetos, a shade of red that matches the hue of the Night Sisters' clothing and, thankfully, a large portion of the paint job of Ahsoka's T6. Following that, while still hiding in the forest, Ahsoka, Sabine and Huyang study the hologram taken from a scan Huyang made of the Eye of Sion while they were fleeing Shin and Marek. The Jedi archives speak of intergalactic hyperspace lanes that follow the migration paths of star whales, named Purgle. Now, this is where we get to one of my personal fundamental issues with the way this story is told. Later on, Ahsoka says to Sabine, "The enemy has the map and the means to get where they want to go. I fear we face a difficult choice. Which is, if we can't make the journey to find Ezra, then no one should." Meaning that they should destroy the map so that Elspeth and the rest of the bad guys can't get to Thrawn, cutting off his return, but also in terms of the way that it's played in the moment, cutting off their access to Ezra. Now, I have no problem with Ahsoka's plan and reasoning for destroying the map. It makes sense. Cutting off Thrawn's access to the galaxy and his return makes sense. But the inferred implications of acting out said plan, especially in terms of how Sabine views it, do not make sense, since they have just seen and been assisted by the Purgle. Now, maybe this is a bit of a leap, but this is why I've grouped episodes 4 and 5 together, because it puts on full display some of the best and worst that this show has to offer, and it's all tied up, in my opinion, in this story decision. To make Sabine, and by extension I suppose Ahsoka, believe that by destroying the map they will no longer be able to rescue Ezra from his exile and never be able to see him again, when it is revealed at the end of the next episode, episode 5, after Ahsoka's reunion and flashback stuff with Anakin, which we'll get to, that that's the answer anyway. And as I just said, we'll get to that, but I'm sorry. That should be the obvious option, not one that Ahsoka arrives at the end of a short journey of enlightenment with her non-crispy former master. At no point before the map is destroyed do Ahsoka or Sabine think or say, "Oh yeah, well, we could just destroy the map anyway when we find it, and then ask the Purgle, who we know are above us and we know are friendly and benevolent, to just take them to this new galaxy in the T6 in the same way that roughly the same way that Ezra asked them to take him and Thrawn to the other galaxy so that this galaxy could be safe from Thrawn." Which, broadly, Ahsoka then does in the following episode. She asks a Purgle to take her with Huyang to this galaxy in order to follow Sabine, who, in this episode, after having an altercation with Shin, witnesses Ahsoka get slashed off a cliff by Baylan, and believing her to be dead, Sabine hands over the map to Baylan, finishing the upload to the Eye of Sion and giving Morgan access to Thrawn. And this really, really annoys me, because if they just destroyed the map and said, "Let's just ask the Star Whales to take us, and the bad guys can't even follow," reuniting us with our friend and ultimately trapping our enemy because Thrawn needs the Eye of Sion to return to this galaxy, then all of this could have been avoided. But it isn't, because the plot needs to split up Ahsoka and Sabine so that Sabine can willingly go to the bad guys and Ahsoka can have her trippy time in the cosmic realm. And the only reason why I'm not more annoyed about this is because I really enjoyed Ahsoka's trippy time in the cosmic realm, the world between worlds, but I wish that it had carried more emotional weight and just made more sense, other than just a slightly contrived excuse to reunite Ahsoka with Hayden Christensen. There would have been nothing wrong with Ahsoka and Sabine destroying the map, going to Peridia together in a Star Whale, the bad guy somehow following them still, possibly by reconstructing, the last 10% of the upload through Night Sister magic, or, something, so you still get the threat of the return, probably more convincingly than the way I've just explained it, but something. And then when they get to the planet and they're reunited with Ezra, and then the bad guys and Thrawn come up against them, and then the Eye of Sion arrives, Baylan fights Ahsoka, then she gets knocked off the cliff on the new planet in the new galaxy. And you end the season with Ahsoka being beaten and reunited in the trippy realm, and you don't know what's going on outside of that realm. Also gives more time for the reunion with Ezra to breathe. And so you can still do all the Hayden Christensen Clone Wars and Darth Vader stuff if you want to, and you can end the season on an awesome cliffhanger, as opposed to the confrontation we got, which just comes out of nowhere, and Baylan just blatantly manipulating Ahsoka during the fight, which Ahsoka should be able to see through. Ahsoka just assumes that Sabina's dead when Shin arrives partway through and Sabine isn't there. Ahsoka loses a little control, gives into the dark side a little, gets sloppy, realizes that Sabine is alive, and then gets shoved off of a cliff. Now, I'm not mad at Sabine for assuming at that point, after Ahsoka is knocked off the cliff, that she might be dead. I'm not technically too mad at Ahsoka for just assuming that Sabine was beaten by Shin considering the events of previous episodes, but I am mad at both of them for splitting up after Hu Yang told them specifically to stay together, and also for neither of them, not even Hu Yang, maybe suggesting to just ask the Purrgil right off the bat to take them to the new galaxy. Sabine's apparent willingness to go with the enemy, which we see slightly shakes Ahsoka, is purely based on both of them not arriving at an obvious conclusion fast enough. Like, for example, Obi-Wan just kind of forgetting in the Attack of the Clones that Jango Fett, the one he knows was hired to kill Padme Amidala by a mysterious superior, Dooku, was also the guy paid by the cloners on Kamino to generate an entire clone army from his DNA. And Obi-Wan also later finds out, thanks to Dooku and Jango being in the same arena in which Obi-Wan is about to be killed to death, that Count Dooku and Jango Fett are evil. And so, I don't know, after the Jedi accept the clone army, I guess everyone just forgot how suspicious that actually was, and another suspicious reason why this clone army was ordered by Dooku instead of Master Sifo-Dyas. Jango Fett tells Obi-Wan that he was recruited by Tyrannus, which was Dooku's Sith name. Okay, he didn't make that connection, but Dooku is also honest with Kenobi about Sidious. So Obi-Wan has all the information he needs to work out the sinister reasons behind this clone army and this war before the war breaks out. And yet Order 66 is seemingly a surprise, not just to him, but to everyone in the Jedi Order. But it doesn't matter, because I guess old Ben just forgot. And this kind of rubbish power of deduction and this terrible detective work on the Jedi's part seems to be a thing that is carried over into this new series, because it's either a stupid oversight on Ahsoka, Sabine, and even Hu Yang's part, or a result of the writers just needing to split the characters up. But anyway, that doesn't even matter, because yay! Hayden Christensen's here! Do I love that Hayden Christensen is back? Yes! Do I like his performance? I love it. Do I like what they do visually with all the stuff with the World Between Worlds and the flashback with the younger Ahsoka in the Clone Wars? Yes. But do I think, in terms of flashbacks, it's too little too late in terms of establishing Ahsoka's self-contained motivations? Also, yes. This experience, this choice to live or die because she's questioning her lineage as a teacher and struggling with being trained as a Jedi during the Clone Wars, becoming a soldier and not a keeper of the peace, yeah, fine. But in terms of motivations, this is coming out of freaking nowhere, even if you've seen the supplementary material that's supposed to support this. Okay, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. I asked for flashbacks and now I'm complaining about the first one that they give us, but that's maybe because I'm just fundamentally unclear about what the show thinks it's attempting to convey in this episode. Even the various fans of this episode, Shadow Warrior, are arguing about what the episode is actually about, what it's actually trying to convey, inputting a bunch of things that weren't even present just to explain its existence. Like every good Star Wars fan should. But good Star Wars fans should also point out when certain things don't make sense within the realm of the universe and in terms of story. Ahsoka's internal conflict, explored in Episode 5, seems to be hinged on Ahsoka's failures as a teacher and questioning her Jedi lineage. What came before her and what will therefore maybe come after her, fearing what Sabine may become due to Ahsoka's lack of skill as a master, as a teacher, her lineage, as I just mentioned, but this conflict lacks foundation given that she does know the ultimate benevolence of the Skywalker lineage. has even conversed with Luke Skywalker himself about his family and lineage before the events of this show, which also makes the conversation and Ahsoka being known as a friend of the family also lack relevance, despite it possessing intrinsic relevance in terms of story. Shadow Warrior's conflict is one that lacks focus because Ahsoka has not reached any other kind of breaking points leading up to this, not even perhaps one of terrible comfort in knowledge such as Sabine possibly dying to absolve Ahsoka of responsibility and the guilt that could come out of that, a dark realization that could bring her a horrible sense of relief. Nope. In fact, nobody has died as a result of Ahsoka's actions, other than the soldiers literally bred for combat that are depicted in this episode that she's crying about. But my point is, it lacks relevance within this story. It explains nothing. Yes, Hayden looks wonderful in his live-action Clone Wars armor, but that's not all I want to see. This conflict couldn't be less relevant in terms of the plot in place to stop Thrawn and the fact that Ahsoka and Sabine are the best hope for that. It's a conflict that would have been probably better suited taking place in the New Galaxy, perhaps in Episode 7, when she could possibly be beaten by Thrawn's forces and based on a more fleshed out internal conflict that's maybe slightly different from this, that's based on more, but we can't have that now because they've blown their irrelevant, confusing, and yet visually interesting, slightly metaphorical beans on Episode 5 flashbacks and cameos that, as I said, have barely any extended or self-contained relevance in this story. Also, Ahsoka should have just used one of her 2 lightsaber handles to maybe lever out the star map as opposed to grabbing it with her bare hands and burning them to a crisp, but I suppose she was losing a fight and she was stressing and obviously not thinking clearly given that she was so easily manipulated off that cliff. That could speak to Balin's strength in the Force, to be fair, and we know that her grabbing that sphere with her hands was also possibly a reason to give her a scarification kind of burn on one of her hands. She's got like some Night Sister markings embedded into her skin now or something. And yes, sure, I did like Ahsoka's eyes briefly turning Sith yellow. I loved Anakin kind of playing the part of Vader to teach her a lesson. Hayden did an amazing job and I wouldn't change any of it. I just wish that we had had more in previous episodes to justify Ahsoka's sudden reasoning for just giving up. There is nothing in the storytelling or dialogue that really indicates any build-up to this confusing internal conflict, but they're hoping you don't notice because they're smearing the screen with live-action reimaginings fueled by nostalgia for more tightly written shows at this point. Ugh. On a more positive side, I really love the sequence of Jacen and Hera listening to the waves of Cetos trying to locate Ahsoka, hearing the saber crashes. Some Star Wars fans I respect massively who have made entire careers out of talking about Star Wars have said that it doesn't quite make sense that Hera can also hear the waves and saber clashes like Jacen can, given that she's not Force sensitive, but I have a theory that some people who have Force sensitive children but were not Force sensitive themselves become more attuned to the Force due to growing a Force sensitive child during pregnancy. To me, that seems like a natural conclusion, and I thought that was the reason. Jacen is obviously Force sensitive because his father was a Jedi, and you could argue that pilots that are as skilled as Hera is are maybe Force sensitive in their own ways, considering the Force resides within all living things. So maybe Hera is Force sensitive, and having Jacen kind of just turned that connection level up a little. I don't know. Just a theory. Anyway, with Jacen's help, Hera and Huyang locate Ahsoka in the oceans of Cetos, and I did like that she's been in the ocean this whole time, and the ocean itself could be seen as a kind of gateway to other realms as it often is in mythology, and I liked Ahsoka being grateful to Jacen for finding her. It's nice to see Ahsoka now dressed in enlightened white following her experience in the World Between Worlds. Just wish that it could have carried a bit more emotional weight, so that when I look at Dave Filoni's influences for Ahsoka, like Gandalf, I could say, yes, that experience that she had in the World Between Worlds completely warranted an Enlightenment-style costume change and a few more smiles. But if I were Ahsoka, and I had looked back on my history and saw that Episode 5 example presented to me, considering the self-contained issues I was facing, the apparent sudden possibility of just giving up, I would be more confused rather than sure of myself after an experience that messed with my foundations as an established person. Anyway, as I referred to, they should have just asked the Purrgil at the start, which of course, due to Ahsoka's new enlightened state, she now realizes is a good idea. God damn it. And she gets an Alpha Purrgil to follow the Eye of Sion to Peridia, holding the T6 in its mouth. A sequence that, regardless of the foundational issues, I very much enjoyed. Alright, that last section seemed merely tinged by positivity, even though there were elements that I really, really did like. I just feel that they were perhaps misplaced within the season and were maybe there for the wrong reasons. But moving on to the final episode we'll be covering, episode 6, Far, Far Away. A title that of course elicits memories of the classic blue text before the beginning of every mainline entry in the Star Wars saga. We see in the opening shot that intergalactic hyperspace looks visibly different than normal, quote-unquote, galactic hyperspace. Instead of the classic and the comparatively now clinical shifting vortex tunnel of blue, we get a far more ethereal, colourful, pulsating vibe as the pod of Purrgil travel to Peridia. Pinks, yellows, greens, oranges, all streaking past and in between the Purrgil's fins and tentacles. This colourful chaos contrasted with the calming rumbling of the star whale's call. All these things exciting me and putting me at ease all at the same time. And the fact that I was reminded of the East Australian current sequence in Finding Nemo, along with, obviously, the whale carrying Marlin and Dory in its mouth. I don't know if that was Dave Filoni's intention, but regardless, loved it. It was a cool way of depicting the differentiations between galactic and intergalactic space travel. And this is the first ever visual example of that in Star Wars history. I think that it's very special, and it's followed by something else that I also thought was rather special. An interesting conversation unfolds between Ahsoka and Hu Yang. Now I've just said that in itself is not the interesting thing. I mean, the conversation itself is interesting. I remember them from stories you would tell us when we were younglings, back at the temple. Ah yes, History of the Galaxy parts 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the best, of course. I quite like this because it's not the first time that Ahsoka has had a sneaky meta line that comments on what are a lot of common held beliefs about Star Wars as a franchise. This line, for example, could be a nod to the original trilogy, where many believe that the first, A New Hope, the one that started it all, is the best. Though some people think that Empire Strikes Back is better, some people think that Return of the Jedi is the best. The great thing is that we all have our own reasons to pick our favourites, original trilogy and otherwise, and we all get to decide why for ourselves. Although parts 1, 2, and 3 could be referring to the 3 eras of Star Wars, the prequels, the OT, and of course the sequel trilogy. I believe, though correct me if I'm wrong, that Ahsoka as a character was conceived by George Lucas, and then Dave Filoni, under George's initial tutelage, brought her to life in the Clone Wars. So it would make sense that Ahsoka would see the first as the best. However, because her character became so popular that she ended up spanning all 3 main eras of Star Wars, minus, of course, everything that had occurred before that point, which itself is mostly explored in Legends comics, books, and other video games, both released and to be released, which is very exciting. We also know that the creator of this show and other shows, as mentioned, is mostly influenced and mostly identifies with the prequel era of Star Wars, which could be another reason why Episode 5 happened the way it did. But anyway, going back to Ahsoka's previous line and moving away from the meta, what does it represent for the characters actually having the conversation within this story, Ahsoka and Hu Yang? We know that Lucas's original concept that would become Star Wars was originally called the Journal of the Wills. Now, the Wills were a kind of celestial race of people that took the great story, the epic myth that was the Skywalker saga, and told it to their young in order to inspire and galvanize them. And we actually see these characters, the Wills, I believe that is the Wills, explored in a Yoda-centric episode of the Clone Wars, where our little green friend visits Dagobah and has a rather meditative conversation with the late Qui-Gon Jinn, who has become rather clued up on how everything works since, being dead. He explains to Master Yoda that all living things in the universe are what form the living force, which in turn feeds the far more abstract cosmic force. This cosmic force that Qui-Gon Jinn mentioned is apparently contained he says to Yoda, within this natural midichlorian-powered planet called the Wellspring of Life, which Yoda manages to actually track down and visit following his contemplative pit stop on Dagobah. Dagobah being the place, of course, where Yoda would later spend the rest of his days. But before that, he gets to have a pretty epic chat with these 5 masked priestesses in the Wellspring of Life, each one representing an emotion, who all decide to put Yoda through various trials. And among other things, of course, we find out that this Wellspring is where life began in what I am calling the prime Star Wars galaxy. An unknown time after the birth of this Wellspring, the Mortis gods came to be within their own celestial realm of the same name. We all know what eventually happens there, and sometime after this, a race of Force-sensitive priests known as the Dai Bendu established what would become the first Jedi temple on the planet Ahch-To, which we get to explore elements of in the sequel trilogy with Luke and Rey. And it would be, of course, where Luke would give himself up to the Force in the end. Say what you will about that movie. Anyway, the Dai Bendu established this first temple around 25,000 years before Luke blows up the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin. We mark the Star Wars timeline by using the shorthand BBY, which of course, if you don't know, stands for Before the Battle of Yavin, and ABY standing for After the Battle of Yavin. So that gives you an idea of how long the Jedi have been around, for those that didn't already know. Anyway, finally, applying all of this explanation to this bloody line that I keep banging on about, perhaps the best one that Ahsoka refers to would be the more detailed version of the tail end of that story, if you like, the establishment of the First Jedi Order. That could be the first story that Ahsoka is mentioning as her favorite. Anyway, they have a conversation about Sabine going with the enemy willingly, and Ahsoka fearing what that might mean. We all know what my thoughts are on the circumstances for Ahsoka and Sabine's separation, so I won't go back into that again. But after Ahsoka asks Huyang to distract her from this unnecessary fear that is clouding Ahsoka's mind, Huyang begins his story with, "A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away." I cried. I won't lie to you. I did. Hearing those words being spoken out loud by a character in Star Wars for the first time in its history gave me chills. Can't get away from that, and nor do I want to. Must have been a big moment for David Tennant. It would be an honor for any of us to be able to speak those words in that context, and the honor was his. I'm jealous. Following that, we see the Eye of Sion exiting hyperspace in a kind of shimmering storm, with the engines and hull burning red hot. As I mentioned earlier, the gold ore that this hyperspace ring is constructed from could be a lot stronger and more durable than usual material used to construct ships in Star Wars in general, and that intergalactic travel even pushed that tougher ore to its limit. Panning across from the hyperspace ring, we see the planet Peridia for the first time, a planet surrounded by rings composed not of dust, rocks, or ice, but Purgle bones. This planet is a Purgle graveyard. This shocking and effective reveal is one of my favorite moments of this episode. It makes me sad, but I love the world building that went into this comparatively standard Star Warsian establishing shot. It also calls back to the Star Wars maps depicting the pathway to Peridia being surrounded by rings of Purgle symbols. Now we know why. I was maybe expecting massive Purgle pods constantly orbiting the planet, but instead we got this, which could depict this planet as a place where Purgle go to die, or perhaps the aftermath of a long ago conflict that may have caused some Purgle to flee to the other prime galaxy where Star Wars is usually set. We learn from Morgan, played by the way by the wonderful Diana Lee Inosanto, that Peridia is the ancient homeworld of her ancestors, the Dathomiri, meaning that the planet Dathomir, situated in the prime galaxy, Maul's homeworld, must have been a planet that the Dathomiri settled on after migrating from this other galaxy eons ago. Now, we know that Dathomir has a strong connection to the dark side of the Force, one of the reasons why natives of that planet have Sith eyes naturally like Maul does, but Dathomir also hosts the natural green, misted, liquidy resource that the Dathomiri derive their magic from. So it's possible that the Dathomiri scanned the Prime Galaxy for this substance, and therefore the most suited planet for their needs before or during the migration from Peridia. We also learned from Morgan that the Dathomiri were among the first to ride the creatures, meaning the Purgle, in the days before time was counted. So the word among would suggest that they were existing alongside some other as yet unnamed progenitors eons before races such as the Jedi and the Sith, or whoever actually started keeping track of the years or the passage of time. We've mentioned the Rakata and their involvement with possibly harnessing the abilities of Purgle to travel through hyperspace. Maybe these are the people that the Dathomiri were existing among. Baylan calls Peridia a graveyard, which paints the story of Peridia that used to be shared between the Jedi down the generations as more of a ghost story that possibly spoke of the Purgle pilgrimage to their deaths, kind of like elephants do, I suppose. I like how Peridia looks. I love the scale of the contorted, screaming Dathomiri statues in comparison to the ship carrying the antagonists on their way down to the planet. Lots of people having compared the look of the Great Tower on Peridia to Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings. I would agree, considering we know that Dave Filoni is not afraid to put his Tolkien-related influences on display, which I massively appreciate. What I appreciate even more, however, is the cues Filoni has taken from Greek mythology, namely in the form of the three great mothers that Morgan, Shin, and Baylan find standing atop this great tower, which itself is reminiscent of the reflex point in design, but far more maintained. These great mothers are called Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos, taken, of course, from Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos, the three fates of Greek mythology, also funnily enough known as the Morai, which was Dave Filoni's influence for Ahsoka's spirit guiding bird of the same name that I mentioned earlier that represents the Mortis daughter. Anyway, according to the mythology, Clotho is the youngest who spins the thread of life, Lachesis is the middle who measures it out, and finally Atropos is the oldest who cuts the thread. These specific duties of the three fates are depicted in this show, not just in the three names of the Great Mothers, but also something I find awesome by their headdresses, all in terms of shape representing the tools used to perform their duties, meaning needle, thread, and scissors. Anyway, I love these new characters, and these were most likely the people that have been whispering across time and space and talking to Morgan. Seeing the three witches standing together also reminded me of the title for the second episode of Ahsoka, Toil and Trouble, evoking the image of the three witches featured in Macbeth, who also tell the future, but in a cryptic fashion that is likely always to the detriment of whoever is requesting the information. The Great Mothers speak with layered voices, similarly to Mother Talzin in Clone Wars. Clotho calls Morgan a child of Dathomir, and Atropos comments on Sabine reeking of Jedi. Lachesis adds to this, calling Sabine dangerous and a loose thread. They obviously don't like Sabine and don't trust her. Perhaps these witches that practice arts that predate the Jedi and the Sith might mean that they see Sabine as a fraud or a false practitioner. But the fact that they're scared of her, calling her dangerous, indicates that Sabine does have some kind of strong connection to the Force, just maybe not a conventional one. If Ahsoka couldn't tell that Morgan was a Night Sister in The Mandalorian, maybe that indicates that Sabine has the Night Sister side of the Force equation or signature, which may not be readable to Jedi or Sith. Even Palpatine was intimidated by Mother Talzin in the Clone Wars, one of the reasons being that he wasn't able to predict her actions. He couldn't read her. Maybe it's the same kind of thing for Sabine. They tie Sabine up and throw her in a cell, and Baylan continues to have some pretty cool and mysterious dialogue about his origins, his relationship with Shin, Shin herself, Peridia itself, and some really well-placed meta-commentary on the cycle of power in the Star Wars universe. I'm going to pick out some of these lines and talk about them a little bit before jumping to Thrawn's reveal and Ezra's reunion with Sabine, so I can wind it all back around with my final thoughts, because the take that I have been nattering on over has been going on for 2 hours and 10 minutes. It might not be that long for you, but it has been for me. Baylan describes Peridia as a land of dreams and madness, as children's stories come to life, like a wasteland of archetypes and ideas that to him perhaps were cautionary tales and bedtime stories. But it's a world of dreams that has died out and now has a bunch of hyperspace whale bones orbiting its atmosphere, folk tales, an ancient past long forgotten. Shin replies that sometimes stories are just stories, which might have something to do with how special certain Star Wars stories are to us as fans, some holding certain eras of the franchise we love in higher regard than others. But I believe his most interesting line has to do with the cycle of power, particularly in the universe of Star Wars itself.
I watched everything I knew burn.
The Jedi Temple?
Couldn't make sense of it at the time. As you get older, look at history and realize it's all inevitable. Fall of the Jedi, rise of the Empire. It repeats again and again and again.
I love this line and what it means for us as fans and for the characters in the story. Imagine you were existing in this universe, this ever-expanding saga of rhyming stories that George Lucas initially created. I mean, cool. You get to fly through space, build your connection with the Force in an established way or your own way, hopefully living out your lives on some cool distant planet with some awesome people going on adventures of self-discovery. But to know that the cycle of power will just be constantly switching from an ineffective and slightly corrupt republic and tyrannical empire, whether that be Palpatine's empire or the Sith Empire of the Old Republic that Malgus was a part of, or of Valkorian's eternal empire that laid waste to both the Sith and the Jedi respectively, because Valkorian was just that powerful. Whatever it may be, what it would be like to be a big or a small part of a universe or galaxy that inevitably becomes locked in galactic warfare, some ineffectual peacetime, and then war again, would be quite the mindfuck. And it seems that this is what Baylan is commenting on. For him, this endless, inevitable cycle is what he seeks to end, which I find really interesting. His journey is far bigger than all of the other characters that we've seen so far in Star Wars in general, because he's going for the power cycle, not power itself. On the meta side, I suppose, perhaps this is a cycle that Filoni wants to not exactly end, but alter and deepen so that the possible creative stagnation of the Star Wars universe I mentioned near the top of this episode may be averted. I sincerely hope that that is the case, but only time, it seems, will tell. It could also be a meta comment for the people who, in a malicious kind of sense, see Star Wars as pointless because it just keeps recycling the same stuff over and over, etc., which I don't believe. But maybe it's also saying shifting between ineffectual governments and tyrannical empires inevitably and constantly over time, with wars going on in the middle of most, if not all of it, even in so-called peacetime, is just a comment on the world that we all live in, which maybe is another reason why people who hate Star Wars don't like Star Wars, because they don't actually view it as escapism anymore. But, what do I know? Moving on, we see Sabine do a kind of whisper call out to Ahsoka from her cell, trying to focus and reach out with the Force. Now, I'm not sure, but I think that this could be the same whisper that we heard from Ahsoka's perspective when she was pulled out of the water in the previous episode, possibly indicating the time dilation between galaxies. I love when Sabine tries to use the Force to open the door, and we see that the sudden rumbling cell isn't as a result of Sabine's Force abilities, but Thrawn's overshadowing arrival on his Star Destroyer, the Chimera, framed brilliantly in the shot because it's made to look like, the ship is rising out of the tower instead of flying directly over it. We also see that the damage done to Thrawn's ship by the Purrgil in the Rebels finale has been repaired with the same golden ore that Morgan used to construct the hyperspace ring, probably a material that is able to be manipulated by Night Sister magic, as I've said like 3 times, or so that the Chimera can actually physically attach to the hyperspace ring to be towed back to the Prime Galaxy. And then we see the first on-screen appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn, played in live action by the amazing Lars Mikkelsen, who of course voiced him in the original Rebels series. So seeing him play him in live action is just awesome and wonderful. And though live action commands him to be a little more understated and reserved than his animated counterpart, I think he pulls it off brilliantly. His opening line is just...
What was first just a dream has become a frightening reality for those who may oppose us.
Gives me chills every time, as does the music that introduces him. Kind of an alien instrumental sound in terms of the usual Star Wars score. Again, Kiner killing it. The stormtroopers chant his name as he walks slowly towards the other characters, and we get some great shots of the troopers themselves. Their armor is dirty, damaged, mismatched, and is often repaired with the same kind of red thread that the Dathomiri clothe themselves in. An aesthetic that suggests to me some sorcery may be involved with these specific troopers, despite the later reveal of the cargo transfer between the Dathomiri Tower and Thrawn's ship that definitely is giving me some Undead Army vibes. The way that the troopers are standing to attention, chanting Thrawn's name, and the very way that they stand and seemingly stare or even gaze is kind of trance-like, making the fact that they are all wearing, of course, identity-cancelling helmets more unsettling than usual. It makes it all more unsettling. Also unsettling, and very, very cool, by the way, is Thrawn's right-hand man, the golden-masked Enoch, the leader and the most loyal of this post-imperial Thrawny cult. In fact, the word Enoch is taken from the Bible and tells the story of a human that became the immediate attendant to the throne of God and received the privilege, if you like, of entering heaven in human form. And side note, a reason why the language of the Judeo-Christian angels is known as Enochian. Anyway, that was a deep cut. Moving on. Thrawn is a character that has always carried and presented himself well, but we do see that at least 9 years has passed, which makes me just think of MGS.
After 9 years on ice.
And that physically Thrawn has aged, and his uniform, though pretty immaculate considering, is frayed and getting past its best. Of course, Thrawn has been living here in a kind of exile and has now been dubbed by some, I've been doing some reading of some articles, as the Napoleon of Star Wars, which I think is really cool. Napoleon being, of course, one of history's greatest military strategists who took over France as a kingly dictator and then was exiled to Elba, but would make his triumphant return to power despite his later and ultimate defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. I've read some books. Anyway, from Thrawn's perspective, within this Napoleon comparison, Peridia could be indeed seen as his version of Elba, meaning his triumphant return to power will be the power that the New Republic will have to contend with. And I have to say, with the combined power of the Dathomiri and Thrawn's tactical genius and possibly an undead army in reserve, and given what we've seen of the New Republic, this New Republic is not fucking ready. And it's interesting how, despite all of our Star Warsian heroes giving and eventually giving their lives to topple the Empire and the First Order in the OT and sequel trilogy, I'm actually so annoyed with the ineffectual Republic that ends up replacing this Empire in the original trilogy that we're focusing on now, that I'm actually getting kind of excited to see them get their asses handed to them by Thrawn, which was a similar feeling, I suppose, I got when watching Andor, actually rooting for the antagonists to achieve their goal because I actually thought that they were very well fleshed out and well written characters. But that was for different reasons, and we'll get to that next time. Speaking of Star Warsian heroes, we finally have the reunion of Ezra and Sabine, who Thrawn lets go with her weapons and a cute Howler mount. Thrawn, of course, secretly hoping that she can lead them to Ezra, and then Thrawn, with the help of Shin and Balin, can eliminate them both. And with the help of the Howler and some cute tiny humanoid turtle shell creatures, Sabine finds her way to her long-lost brother, played wonderfully again by Iman Isfandi. He's got the look, he's got the voice, he knows exactly how to stand, how to smile. As Ezra, he looks like Ezra's father did in the Rebels series. He carries himself with confidence. His sudden switch to seriousness when he asks Sabine if what he did to help the rebellion, i.e. taking Thrawn out of the equation, actually worked, whether it actually made a difference. It's a small thing, but it worked really, really well. We see Sabine sidestep the sharing of circumstances that led her here, wanting to just be happy in the moment. And I was thinking, yeah, she's probably thinking that when I tell Ezra about the whole map decision, he's just going to ask why the hell we didn't ask a bloody Purgle in the first place and destroyed the map right off the bat. But hey, I don't know, because I haven't seen the last 2 episodes yet. So after my first ever public relative deep dive into Star Wars, what are my final thoughts about Ahsoka, at least the episodes I've seen? Because of course, it's not finished yet. As you've heard, I have my issues with it, but are those issues outweighed by the amount of times I cried with happiness. You might not believe me, but the answer is yes. So far, anyway. Even if I also believe that some of the things being put on display for this show, the things that made me weep with happiness regardless, while awesome, were there for the wrong reasons. I still had fun with these 6 episodes. I will admit that a lot of the tears, as I've said many times, were based on nostalgia, but I'd like to point out that they weren't necessarily nostalgic tears from childhood. Clone Wars was something that started in 2008, but I didn't get to that for many years. And then when Rebels came out, which was nearly 10 years ago, I was 18, and I don't think I got to it until I was 21. So I can't really blame the happy tears too much on nostalgia and being a child, because when I decided Rebels was my favorite show, I wasn't the same age I was when I decided, say, that Empire was my favorite OT Star Wars movie. I think that Star Wars just affects me in a positive way hugely, probably disproportionately in the way that it does so many people. And yeah, we can talk about creative stagnation, repeating storylines, and I can rant on and on and on and on about how some things just don't make sense from a writing perspective in terms of character actions, and how simple changes could have been made to make it more acceptable to a picky fanboy such as myself, but that doesn't mean that those mistakes ruin Star Wars for me, and it certainly does not mean that I've grown to dislike it due to spotting these flaws. Broadly, I'm very, very happy with the direction that Dave Filoni seems to be attempting to take the franchise in. Ahsoka is one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. The Rebel series that he also made was my favorite show of the Disney canon animated stuff. Seeing Lars Mikkelsen with blue skin and red eyes playing Grand Admiral Thrawn in live action, god damn it, I can't not love this. This show is technically made for me. The Purgle, the Lothcats, Ezra, Hera, Chopper, Jason, Sabine, all of the fact that I've watched all the supplementary material, yes, all the things I already love, yes, all the things I already know. And that's what a lot of Star Wars haters often say, it just references itself. And yeah, a lot of the times it does, and that doesn't work for everybody. But as a lifelong fan who, still gets something out of any part of Star Wars that I got something out of to begin with, and I still, like I say, still get something from it, it still works for me. I just wish that they could have been a little more creative with depicting Ahsoka's history in live action and clarifying her motivations a bit more, so that the cosmic realm sequences that we are watching carry a bit more emotional weight in terms of the self-contained story of the series. And that's another thing. I say those things so that my brain will stop saying things like, oh, it's a good thing that you remember that episode of that other thing, otherwise you might be lost with this current thing that we're referencing here. They contextualize brilliantly with Andor, The Mandalorian, and Book of Boba Fett, all of which Filoni was the supervising director on most episodes of, and they didn't decide to use the flashback idea until episode 5 in this series, which I find bizarre. They even did it with Obi-Wan's series, with Hayden Christensen coming back for that scene, and obviously he came back to play Vader again, which was great. I just feel that, I can't really, for example, watch this series with someone who hasn't seen or at least knows about most of the supplementary material without having to give a huge amount of context. Now, in Star Wars, not knowing things can be a luxury. We'll talk about we'll talk next episode about what order Star Wars should be watched in. That's a debate that I find really, really interesting. You get to experience it firsthand for the first time. But in this case, I'd have to explain so much that it makes me question why they just don't do some recontextualizations for things in this live-action series as necessary to explain certain character mannerisms or dynamics. I understand that you don't want to constantly be redoing things in live action that have already been animated and be accused of getting money for old rope in a blatant way, unlike the usual way that Star Wars does that, but that doesn't bother me. But in this case, I believe that it would have not only been interesting, but it would have also served the story much better if this is the story that they're wanting to tell. I don't need Morgan Elsbeth flashbacks or Balin and Shin flashbacks, to be honest, but to justify the character dynamic between Ahsoka and Sabine, especially in the earlier episodes, I believe that they would have helped a great deal. I can hope that in future episodes and in future series we will see more of these flashback sequences, like we saw in episode 5, but with less shaky foundations. And I can also hope that this series and others continues to comment and alter the seemingly endless cycle of Star Wars that seems to not just be pissing some fans and, of course, all haters of the franchise off, but by evidence of a line from the most interesting character in this show, also apparently the characters in the stories themselves. I can hope that things improve. I can still hope that things change for the better. It is my basic right as a lifelong Star Wars fan to hope not just for balance in the Force, but for improvements in the franchise. Because, as they say, rebellions and revolutions are built on hope. Oh, also, just before we get to the Cabaret Q&A, I feel like I have to briefly mention another reason for flashbacks and unnecessarily stupid storytelling that could have been avoided within Ahsoka, given the lack of self-contained context we get for Ahsoka's past. And what I mentioned at the top of this episode about Ahsoka's encounter with the Rakshir. I mean, wouldn't that have been a perfect story element to refer to in live action and support Ahsoka just asking the Purrgil for help right off the bat and avoiding the near baseless conflict that was depicted in the actual episode to hopefully be replaced by something better? That, as a flaw to me, is a perfect way to encapsulate my point about needing some historical references depicted and using those at logical points to move the present day plot forward. And if Star Wars, as I said, is going to continuously reference itself over and over again, then do that, but at least do so logically, in a way that serves the story, rather than needlessly mirroring shots from the OT. They're just unnecessary. I bet those who have seen Tales of the Jedi and that moment with the Rakshir have been asking the same question that I've been repeatedly asking in this analysis. Why didn't they just ask the Purrgil immediately if they were going to do that anyway, given that Ahsoka clearly has strong connections with animals present within the Star Wars universe? When it comes to what this show is trying to say or do other than entertaining fans, I still think that this show has some interesting themes like the exploration of the cycle of power and what that might mean for people who either seek to end that cycle or are unwittingly stuck within it. To add to what some have mentioned, as I have, that the show doesn't have enough self-contained emotional weight, I wonder if a reason for that could have something to do with the general apathetic reaction a lot of Star Wars gets from the casual fan these days. The Last Jedi divided the fandom so much that some left Star Wars behind, in my opinion, the more casual viewers, and they left it behind for good. And a large amount of those who stayed would have stayed no matter what, because they love it so much. So maybe this show is made for those people, for the ones who stayed. People like me, someone who has seen a lot of all the supporting material and who doesn't technically need recontextualizations. And that might shed some light on how people currently making Star Wars feel about the fans that they've lost. Maybe they're not trying to get new viewers in anymore. Maybe they are just simply catering to the people who remained loyal to Star Wars after, depending on who you ask, Rian Johnson, J.J. Abrams, or both messed it up completely. And if that's the case, that's disappointing. But if it's true, it would explain the lack of self-contained strength this new Ahsoka show has, but also the amount of responsibility it's shouldering to move the franchise in a semi-new direction. And if this show, along with others of course, I mean, this is all apparently leading up to a Thrawn movie, which I'm wondering about in terms of that film providing explanation for its own events. Maybe it too will require everyone to have a 2-week-long Disney Plus marathon just so that they can go to the theatre and understand a larger amount of what they're paying extra to see. But that's another thing. Ahsoka as a character feels more than ever like she's being used as a setup vehicle, which I honestly think is a shame because her character deserves better than that. Better than I believe this current show format is able to provide. And if they are viewing her as a setup vehicle to put live action spin-off things on show, like The World Between Worlds and Thrawn's Return, it would make a hell of a lot of sense why her motivations throughout a show that is named after her feel so out of place. I think this show has a lot to say about in-lore reasons why Star Wars is what it is and does what it does. But as I said up top, I think that certain scripting decisions and a need to overshadow the bizarre sequel trilogy of films with something better has made the creators lose sight of what the show is called and why I believe it should exist, as a proper character study of one of the coolest characters in Star Wars history, not just a vehicle for a superior follow-up. It kind of, in terms of the format that it's presenting, to set up this Thrawn movie, it kind of reminds me of the Mark Webb Amazing Spider-Man movies that were just there to set up a Sinister Six movie that ended up not happening. That's kind of how a lot of elements of Ahsoka feel at the moment. Despite the good things that this show has done and does present well, I think that is the disturbance in the Force that I couldn't help sensing when watching this, at least so far. And I'm hoping that when we come back to chat about the final 2 episodes, that disturbance will be nothing more than a distant memory, or a relatively recent one in context of dates. Final side note, which may undo everything that I've said over the last 2 hours. Watching Ahsoka's journey from her birth in Tales of the Jedi through the Clone Wars, Rebels, and The Mandalorian and Boba Fett in order to prepare for this episode that I'm doing now, it was actually really fun. In early October, we'll do a deep dive into the remaining 2 episodes, and after that point, I'll be able to give you my true final thoughts on this new Ahsoka series as a whole and what implications its events may have on the Star Wars universe going forward. Alright. Thanks for listening. Time for a quick Q&A. Wachow! So, because I've been rabbiting on about Ahsoka Tano for over 2 hours at this point, we're going to be doing 3 questions in this Q&A, and they're not going to be hugely elaborate because I don't want to take up too much of your time. We'll probably do a longer Q&A next episode of The Tale's End when we're just covering 2 episodes of Ahsoka. But anyway, these 3 questions come from Magpie86, so special thanks to them for reaching out. Question 1, what's been the most challenging part of this season of the show? Oh, well, I would say growing it and still keeping it coherent, especially recently without the aid of the actual narrator, has been challenging. Editing has become more challenging because, as I said, especially in these recent stories, we don't have the narrator telling everybody what's going on. We just have him occasionally speaking when he's spoken to, or in this case, spoilers. By the end of Scars Part 3, he's completely out for the count. He's not dead, but completely out for the count, so he's not speaking at all. So the editing has therefore become more challenging because instead of Regrin just telling you that noises are happening or that doors are opening and closing and all of the stuff that he does, minus the abstract narration that he also provides, things like sound effects and delineation or depiction of background story elements like doors opening and closing, they're led and pushed through in sound effects as opposed to narration now. So that's become challenging in terms of placing them correctly, making sure that they sound like what I'm trying to depict that they sound like. So I suppose it's been the editing mostly. Also contemplation of investment in higher quality recording gear and soundproofing, because this new place I'm in has brick walls, so the way that sound bounces off the walls isn't particularly pleasant, and so there's a bit more effort that has to go into the general audio editing in terms of making it sound cleaner. So things like investing in better, because I do have soundproofing stuff in here, but better soundproofing stuff and more expensive mics and things like that, all things that I'm considering in terms of coming back for season 3. So working out where I'm gonna find extra finances for that and things like that's been challenging. So I suppose that's been the most challenging part of this season. Question 2, what's been the best thing about this season? Letting the other characters breathe and start to question their new place in the universe. I mean, some people reached out when they're chatting about their thoughts on the show, which again, I really appreciate that you guys reach out and give your comments. That this season has been pretty heavily focused on Jamie Mortimer. It's been the Jamie season. I've been putting her through quite a lot of stuff, a lot of existential crises that some she's learned from, some she's not. Her responsibility, the responsibility that she has that she's shouldering now is definitely, it's quite a hefty responsibility in terms of training Grayson or this new version of Grayson. One thing that I really do like about this season, but has also been a challenge, even though it's something that I really do enjoy, is the size of the cast of characters. Because what I used to do, I suppose, the cast of characters would be quite large, but in terms of the way that I would group characters together in a story, there would be 2 or 3 in one story, and then 2 or 3 in another story, and there would be a different 3 characters each story, So, there were some that obviously were returning characters and Redgrins in basically every episode, of course, but it was mainly for my confidence level at that time, because I wasn't sure that I was able to depict as many as 9 different people all having a conversation at once, which I've hopefully learned to do and been able to achieve in, for example, stories like Grandma Grin or Scars, parts 1, 2, or 3, because there's a lot of characters in those stories. And sometimes I like to give myself a break by, in between huge shows that have a lot of cast members in them, or characters in them, I will then do a standalone episode the following month that's just got Redgrin narrating and has just 2 or 3 characters in it, so that I can kind of give myself a little bit more breathing room in terms of workload as each show goes by, because I'm now doing 2 things per month, as well as all the other stuff that I do, which is great, because I love doing this, and I love answering these questions and kind of working it out as I go, because I don't script these answers. I kind of have some bullet points that I want to remember, that so I don't forget to mention certain things, that by the time I finish recording, I'll be like, oh crap, I forgot to talk about that. So I have some bullet points as answers, but it's nice to be able to kind of talk through it all and work out what's been the best and more challenging parts of the season, because until I actually read these questions, I don't really think about it. So cast of characters growing, something that I've enjoyed, but it's also been a challenge. Letting all the characters breathe, as I said. I particularly enjoyed the Scars story, Scars parts 1, 2, and 3, which last month was the part 3 upload, and then the conclusion to that and the season itself will be coming in October and November. The world of VC feels bigger now, and it feels less like a crazy celestial sitting in a closet just shouting his thoughts into a microphone. It feels more like a living, breathing world, which is, that was my aim when starting season 2, was to make it feel bigger and more lived in as a universe. And I'm, nowhere near done. We've got so many things left to explore, and so many things left to discover about these characters. I'm really, really excited to keep going with it. Speaking of the characters, this third question, what's your main inspiration for Redgrin? Now, those of you who know or have heard of the Batman animated series, the voice of Batman, Kevin Conroy, sadly passed away recently, or relatively recently. He was a huge inspiration for me growing up, obviously, because he was at my version of Batman and many other people's version of Batman. When you're reading the comic, his voice is what you hear. And like Kevin Conroy playing Batman, my main influence for Redgrin, at least when I conceptualized the character, was obviously one of Batman's greatest villains, but particularly Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker's rendition in voiceover of the Joker that was mostly featured in the Batman animated series and some animated movies, and of course the Batman Arkham video games. If you're familiar with any of that, any of the things I've just mentioned, then you would know where my inspiration for the voice and, elements of the mannerisms for Redgrin come from. Growing up, I used to do so many voices, Gollum, Palpatine, the Joker, Heath Ledger's Joker when The Dark Knight came out. That was a voice that I was particularly fond of showing off to people. One of the voices that I could never get down when I was younger, probably because my voice hadn't broken enough yet, was the Mark Hamill Joker voice. I just couldn't get it down, and it made me really sad. And I'm not saying, by the way, that my Mark Hamill rendition and voice that I use is perfect. It's not, and I think the imperfections in it are kind of what give Redgrin his other character elements, or they bring them out more, because it's not just a straight up impression. There are things that he says and the way that he talks that isn't Joker-esque, but a lot of the sound of his voice is quite similar in terms of timbre and some inflections. But anyway, when I was younger, it was a voice that I just couldn't do it, and I was really sad. I'm gonna have some Red Bull. After a lot of work and perseverance, I managed to get it down somewhat when I was a little bit older and after my voice had broken a little bit more. And by the time I'd got it down, I was like, I got to use this for something. I've been working so hard on it. Like, I'm not just going to use it to make people laugh, in the lunch queue. I'm going to use it. And I think that's when I conceptualized a reason to use this voice, was to create a character around him that had his own characteristics and elements to him, but sounded Joker-esque. That was my main thinking. But what was interesting was, I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. That's not the interesting thing. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, and I particularly like, I like all of it, and up until it gets to certain elements of Chris Chibnall's run on Doctor Who, although Russell T Davies is coming back, and I'm really, really happy about that. David Tennant and Catherine Tate are coming back to reprise their roles for the kind of bridge episode between Jodie's Doctor and the new Doctor, whose name I have completely forgotten, which is really embarrassing. But anyway, this is a tangent, so it doesn't matter. Big Doctor Who fan, and we're going to be talking about his return with Catherine Tate. That's going to be something that we're going to be covering on the tail's end, because it's something that I can't go past. I'm gonna have to be watching that. I'm going to be deep diving into it, because Doctor Who is something that has, kind of like Star Wars and a lot of other franchises, has kind of snapped in two in terms of fandom, and elements of the story have kind of, depending on who you ask, kind of ruined the mystery of a lot of who the Doctor is. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. This is why I script most of the things that I'm talking about, because otherwise this is how they would all be, and I would never get anything done. David Tennant is one of my favourite Doctors, and I used to watch his run on Doctor Who religiously, particularly while he was still doing it, while it was airing. And there are 2 episodes in his first season, but the second season of the revival, called The Impossible Planet and The Satan Pit. Now, when I was younger, and this would have been about 2006, so I would have been 11, around about, and there were parts of Doctor Who that did scare me. I mean, the gas mask empty child in the first series of the revival scared the hell out of me. But in terms of the second series version of the gas mask empty child that gave me that same kind of fear was when the Doctor and Rose go and visit a sanctuary base that has a black hole above it that is being kept in a gravitational pull on this planet by an unknown power source, which they're drilling down to find. And what they find is basically the devil and his mind escapes this under prison that he's been kept in by, progenitors unknown from, before time, as he says, or as the Ood say. The devil consciousness escapes and finds its way into the archaeologist of the sanctuary-based team. This consciousness, before entering this guy, Tobias Zed, I think was his name, he's whispering, the consciousness is whispering to Toby, telling him not to turn around. I might put a clip of the actual sound of the voice, because you'll know what I mean in terms of inspiration, when he goes,
"Don't turn around.
Don't turn around.
Don't look at me.
Don't look at me."
And I used to find that absolutely terrifying. And as a kid, I'd be like, no, don't look at him. No, don't look. He's scary. Don't look at him. And also there's a scene in that later, once he gets the consciousness inside him, and he goes and bathes in the black sun, as the computer says, to Scooty Monesta, who then gets murdered by this newly deviled up Tobias Zed. He just turns and he smiles, and he's got the markings on his face and the red eyes, and the way that he's just smiles is so unsettling. Even when I watch it now, oh my God, that kind of nostalgic eye I was talking about earlier, but the kind that makes you still be slightly scared of things that used to scare you when you were a kid, even though as an adult that you look at it totally differently, but there's part of you that's like, oh no, I don't like that. But anyway, him saying things like,
Don't turn around.
and his very gravelly, growly, but also incredibly composed voice, I didn't realize at the time until watching it again when I was slightly older. But I remember thinking, God, maybe one of the worst fears I had when I was 11 mixed with one of the greatest loves that I had being the Joker. And, if you're inside the Joker's head, you're not scared of anything except being forgotten, as is explained in the Arkham Knight series of games, or the Arkham series of games. He's basically afraid of nothing. So being in his head, you're not going to be scared of much. But the fact that his voice, that Joker's voice, kind of echoes just slightly the voice of this devil character in this Doctor Who episode, and the way that he says, don't turn around. And when I'm in front of the mic and I lean in close and I'm doing all of this stuff and I'm making fists and I'm like grabbing my face, to get into the
Real feel of the character.
and I'm making all these there's probably a reason why I don't film myself when recording, as an example, or why I am yet to get back in front of the camera, because in terms of me actually doing this voice, it's quite harrowing to look at, let's just put it that way. But as I was recording, I think it would have maybe been a part of way through the first season, maybe the end of season 1. I remember saying the word don't, and then that same day watching that Doctor Who episode, the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit, and going, oh man, maybe that was a subconscious inspiration for this voice as well, because the Joker's voice is very, very animated and he's laughing all the time, and Redgrin does laugh, but he's the kind of, his stance, his general stance is more sinister in nature. And I'm not saying the Joker's isn't, but in terms of he's not jumping around like a moron, and, laughing and cackling and shooting off guns and constantly making jokes. He's a bit more cerebral and meditative. And I think that maybe that cerebral and meditative part, or at least some of it, comes from this devil consciousness character who, up until relatively recently, like we're talking, about a year or 2 or 3 years ago, where I actually discovered that this might have been a subconscious inspiration, it kind of hit me and I was like, whoa, like that's I didn't realize that melding those two things together in my head would be what became Redgrin. So, yeah, there's your kind of semi-long-winded answer to that question. But with that, we are going to bring this episode of The Tale's End to a close. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the review, deep dive analysis of Ahsoka and me natter on about my own creations. We'll be back in early October, about the 5th or 6th, to cap off the Ahsoka discussion and maybe open the discussion of the Doctor Who return or the Daryl Dixon show, depending on how dates match up. So we'll see you sooner than usual, because usually it would be obviously end of the month uploads. But so Tale's End on the 5th or 6th, talking about Ahsoka 7 and 8, and then Halloween special. No Tale's End at the end of October, because I'm going to put one out at the beginning of October, and then obviously Tale's End in November and season finale. And I'm considering whether to still do the Tale's End while I'm taking time off from VC in December and January. But I'll let you know that when I know more myself. But as I said, thank you so much for listening, and as always, it was nice talking to you. Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta born on... Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta... I never know how to say that word. Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta... Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta... Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta born on... See, it just doesn't sound right when I say it in my accent. Togruta... Ahsoka Tano is a Togruta born on planet Sheely. Sheely?
If you're a podcast clown like I am, you must have dreamed about starting your own. Let me tell you, my dreadful darlings, it's never easy, but it's one of the best decisions I ever made. It was either that or waste away in my own subjective ascendance. Of course, it can be more than just a little overwhelming to know how to get started. Buzzsprout can help you launch your podcast professionally and in style, linking you with all of the major podcasting platforms such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and much, much more. Join us up in the buzzing, sprouting podcast cloud to breathe in the renowned analytical sound of the accurate analysis and promotion tools provided. Follow the link in the show notes below to start your journey and receive a $20 Amazon gift card. We're waiting for you. Buzzsprout, the best and excitingly prettiest way to start a podcast.
Shin Hati.